Are we headed for another January 6th? Since January 2021, media and scholars have warned of another January 6th if Trump loses the 2024 election. Will Trump supporters again head to Washington, D.C. if he loses the election? But what if Trump wins? What are the risks that Harris supporters would mobilize themselves in an attempt to stop the certification of President Donald Trump should he be elected in 2024? As we approach November 5th, the final day to vote in the 2024 general election, will there be a peaceful transition of power? Will our history of peaceful transitions of power, the presidency, be at risk? To answer these questions and more, we are joined by Dr. Robert Pape, a globally recognized expert on security, threats, and January 6th. He'll offer a presentation and a discussion of new research on January 6th, examining what the past tells us about the future of a peaceful transition and transfer of power in Washington, D.C., and the implications for the future of American democracy. I'm Ben Spagan. I'm the vice president of the JES, a nonpartisan think tank headquartered in Erie, Pennsylvania, offering world-class programming, publications, and plenty more worldwide, thanks to the power of Zoom. I have first had the opportunity to meet Dr. Pape in November 2021 when he presented at the JES's Global Summit and when he received a key to the city from Erie Mayor Joe Schember. He presented Holding the Line, Political Violence in America and the Implications for Democracy. I am now delighted and honored to welcome him back to the JES stage, this time virtually, to learn from him again and to be in conversation with him. An Erie native son, Dr. Pape is a political scientist and professor at the University of Chicago, where he is the founding director of CPOST, the university's Chicago Project on Security and Threats. He graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 1982 before getting his PhD in political science at the University of Chicago, where he has been a professor since 1999. Before I turn things over to Dr. Pape, I want to go through some housekeeping. Now, we are hosting this event both via Zoom using webinar and are live streaming on the JES's Facebook page. If you're attending via Zoom, please feel free to interact with us using the Q&A function, as we are welcoming questions from you, the viewers. If you're tuning in via Facebook, leave your questions and comments in the comment section of this post. We're going to work our way through as many of those questions as we can following the presentation. If you're listening to or watching this program, streaming it on demand later, still send those questions, those comments. We'll get them to Professor Pape. We'll work to continue to keep this conversation going. You can submit them either on the JES's Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And for more information about the JES, including upcoming programs, publications, and much, much more, head over to our website, jeserie.org, and be sure to connect with us on the social channel of your choice. Now, to address those questions and examine our recent past to help us look ahead to our future when it comes to January 6th and presidential elections, I want to turn things over to Dr. Robert Pape.
Thank you very much, Ben. And it's great to talk to all of you who have joined us. And I just want to echo what Ben has said. What a pleasure it is to speak to Erie, and especially for me personally. I was born in Erie. I like to say I wasn't just born in Erie, and I was raised by Erie. And I went to the University of Pittsburgh as an undergraduate, and I have tried to come back every single chance I have had many, many times since. And it is always just a pleasure to speak to people from Erie, Western PA, and beyond, which I know this will reach. So what I want to do now is screen share, and I'm going to just take a moment. Let me open this up. And we're really going to focus on January 6th. And I want to talk about, are we headed toward another January 6th? And I want to do this in a broader way. And I want to do it in a way that maybe is a little bit different because I don't just want to talk at you. I want to show you some things. See, I think a central question for our democracy is whether January 6th was just a normal protest, as it's now often been portrayed, in which case future January 6th would not threaten our democracy, regardless of which party did them, and we should expect more. Or was it that threat or danger to democracy? Now, I've been spending 4 years studying multiple aspects of January 6th, and I want to share that with you. Overall, I have in my career studied political violence for 30 years. You heard I'm a professor at the University of Chicago. Much of that time I studied political violence overseas, but for the last 4 years, I've really focused on American political violence in a variety of ways to get a deep understanding of the violent dangers to American democracy. Now, this includes extensive research on January 6th, not just by myself, but with large research teams at the University of Chicago. That means studying all the stated public motives of every person charged, over 1,300 as of this summer. And that means analyzing over 1,500 pages of court documents, social media posts, local media stories for all of those individuals. And this is done, as I mentioned, with large research teams at the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats. And these research teams operate 40 weeks a year. This also includes looking at all the work that's been produced by others, whether that's major films by the New York Times, Washington Post, or the brand new January 6th film, Fight Like Hell, that you can go see on YouTube, but also Senate, House reports, basically as much information as exists publicly, we have not just reviewed vaguely, but dissected. Now, I'm also a scholar that has advised. This doesn't mean paid consulting. This means advised, and this is quite a privilege, every White House since 9/11, and also multiple other political leaders on all sides of the aisle. So I am not coming at this as a partisan Democrat, partisan Republican. I'm coming at this as a scholar who has been focused on dangers to our democracy, both abroad and at home, for pretty much my whole working life. Now, what I want to zero in on is, was January 6th a danger to democracy? What happened on January 6th? Was this just a mostly peaceful protest, or was it violent? Why did January 6th happen? Was this just a few bad actors or spontaneous uprisings, or was something else involved? And then, did January 6th follow or violate our Constitution? I believe these are the three critical issues. Now, to do this, I want to start with an anatomy of the Capitol Hill attack because you see, we have a minute by minute accounting of what happened on that day on January 6th. And I just want to briefly walk through this because I think this will help explain a lot of what's occurring. And it's not just then an interpretation or somebody who's just talking at you. So we know the basics on January 6th. There were 2,000 people. They were supporters of Donald Trump. They stormed or entered the Capitol without permission. And the goal was to overturn the result of an election for president that would retain Donald Trump as president. And 5 people died as a result of this event. Who were the key elements of the Capitol attack? Well, I'm sure you know before you come in that Donald Trump is a key actor, and we'll talk a bit about him. Instigators, meaning Proud Boys, Alex Jones, key point. But there's also an X, and I really want to underscore this X factor because I don't think this is the factor that's gotten enough attention. And the X factor I want to focus on is the mob itself. Literally, the thousands of people in that crowd. And I want to focus a lot on them, how they came to be there, how they were inspired to attack in the Capitol, how they stopped, what they did inside the Capitol, because I don't think this has gotten enough attention as there's kind of become a summary or white noise almost in our media discussion of January 6th. Now, I will make the case that it was the mob that made the decisive difference and made January 6th January 6th. It was the huge crowd plus Donald Trump that are the keys to January 6th. Only that huge crowd could have overwhelmed Capitol Hill police. Only the crowd could have caused Congress to adjourn and obstruct Congress's role in the transfer of power. And only Trump could have assembled and inflamed that huge crowd. Now, you take away the militias, which have gotten a ton of attention, I think this attack may well still have happened. But you take away the large mob, and this attack would not have happened. It was the mob that made the decisive difference, and it was Trump who made the decisive difference to there being a mob in the first place. Now, why did they come? Let me roll back to some crowds, Stop the Steal crowds, before January 6th. There were two in Washington, D.C., one on November 14th and one on December 12th. Notice there were about 15,000 people who showed up, about 700 Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, the same number, by the way, 700 who came on 9/11, on January 6th. But that's what they looked like, that crowd. But there was no call by Trump. Trump's call to come to Washington did not happen until December 19th, when he gave his famous big protest in DC on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. And this is the crowd that answered Trump's call. So the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and instigators, they may have tried to rally some folks, but when Trump asks people to come, they come. And of course, he helped. He didn't just send one tweet. He was working this for weeks. But this is two different pictures of the mall. So you could see the vast number, literally over 10 times the number that came before. This is the power of Donald Trump. Now, the geography helps here to sort of put this in perspective. The ellipse that I just showed you is over on the left, and the US Capitol is on the right. And that big crowd of supporters is gathering over on the left. And how the mob stormed the Capitol, well, the key process started during Trump's speech, and it accelerated after his tweet denouncing Mike Pence. And let me just show you this minute by minute. So about 12:10, Trump speaks for almost an hour. As he's speaking, Trump is saying, "You'll never take back our country with weakness." Well, the crowd is not ignoring Trump. I've been to Trump rallies. They are hanging on his every word, and he often hears the crowd hanging on his every word. And the crowd is responding back to him, storm the Capitol, invade the Capitol, and he's not telling them, "No, don't do that." He's encouraging it. And let me show you in real time what this looked like, the relationship between Trump and the crowd.
Never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. Leave the Capitol building. Take the Capitol.
So this is no surprise to Donald Trump. He's egging this on in real time. And then what happens is there's a steady stream of that crowd from the ellipse to go to the Capitol, which Trump is telling them to do as he's speaking. And I won't keep showing you video, but you would see video that they know they're going to storm the Capitol. They know they're going from Trump to storm the Capitol, and Trump has just told them essentially to do that. Well, you can then see on the map here this giant tidal wave of people. There's not just a few thousand going, there's many thousands descending like a tidal wave on the Capitol. Yes, there were a few thousand there before the ellipse speech, but this is just going to become quickly overwhelmed by the tidal wave of people. Here's also a map of the perimeter defense of the Capitol. There are three lines of defenses, basically three lines of bike racks. Then you have the Capitol itself. The violence starts on the west, you will see, and then it spreads to the east. There are only less than 200 Capitol Hill police here. They're set up to deal with those Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. They're not set up for the mob. Now, 12:45, the mob now is getting very close to that first outer perimeter. There's the handful of police that are there. There's one person then, and we're not still clear about exactly why he does this, but there's one person, and he goes and pushes against those bike racks, and then there's more, and then within seconds, the mob pours in. This isn't just a few people, it's not just a few bad eggs. The mob is descending. And their flow, that tidal wave, is bursting like a dam, and they're going then right to, within minutes, the next line of defense. And this is what it looks like if you're in the Capitol and you've got these people coming at you. Now, many of you are watching this at home. I would like you just to imagine if you look out your window and you saw this mob here. Is this just peaceful? Okay. Now, I'm not telling you they have guns. I'm not telling you they've hurt anybody yet, but are we just good with this? Okay. No, this is very, very dangerous. And you'll see it's about to get a lot more dangerous. Again, to show you the maps here of what's happening on the West Lawn, that tidal wave of the mob is descending on the West Lawn, and it's coming then right to the final barriers, and it's seeping around the Capitol to surround it. And then the bursts are starting to happen in the next line of defenses. There's still just 200 cops there. And now the mob mentality takes over. Up until this point, you could call it a crowd, but this is now becoming a mob mentality because they're now rioting as they break through the final barriers at multiple points to get into the Capitol. And there's still just tiny numbers of police. They're trying to pull back to more defensible lines. And what do the mobs start to do at this point? Make weapons. They want to burst through. And what are they making weapons out of? Whatever they got. Signs, police batons, police shields, anything they can grab becomes a weapon. The police, yes. Do they use bear spray? Of course. I mean, wouldn't you want them to? Their job was to protect the Capitol from it being breached. And this is then the wall of people, literally on the doorstep of the Capitol. And Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, I want to give them a shout out. They estimated the size of the crowd. They did computer programming. That's the best we have. The size of this picture that we're seeing, which is only one part of who's surrounding the Capitol, but the police here are outnumbered as much as 58 to 1. And I got to ask you folks, you see those handful of police, what would you want them to do? Now, 174 of them will end up going to the hospital, okay? Several of them are so frustrated, they commit suicide later. But what do we really want the police to do? And that's why you get some different behavior by the police, because there's nothing in the manual to handle 58 to 1 here. Now, 210, the mob rushes now on the east. They're starting to come through. I showed you the west, the east, and basically you're getting a pincer movement against the Capitol, where the Capitol now is being breached by two sides at almost exactly the same time. The lawmakers are still in, okay. And then the mob is breaking into the Capitol at multiple points within just a couple minutes. And this is the very first person at 212 who broke into the Capitol. Not a Proud Boy, not an Oath Keeper, not part of a militia. And here's the one policeman who was there. And you could see he doesn't quite know what to do. He's going to try to spray something and run away. He's not quite sure because what's coming after him is a mob pouring in right behind that one person. Now, yes, as Tucker Carlson has famously showed us, we can find minutes here of things, even in a melee like this, that look calm. That's going to happen. But that doesn't mean this is all calm. It doesn't mean this is all mostly peaceful. And you just got to imagine this mob coming into your house and you're saying, well, okay, there is 10 seconds where it was peaceful in my front corridor. Does that mean this was a peaceful? No, it doesn't. Here is the rioters now literally hunting the lawmakers. This is when they're chanting, "Where's Nancy? Where's Mike Pence?" Now, again, maybe you think this is just okay, in which case it's fine for them to grab Nancy and grab Mike Pence. This is, though, very dangerous, as I think it's obvious. Here they are running through the Capitol, chasing, hunting for the lawmakers, and the police are warning others they're coming. Here they get within 40 feet, probably about a minute or less from grabbing Mike Pence. That's how close they got. And you can see that just this is happening at 2:20. And the other lawmakers are now adjourning. They're running away because the mob is now inside hunting them, and the Pence is being rushed away. Just 4 minutes later is when Trump's famous tweet comes, which is Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. This is now incredibly inflaming. As the mob is hunting lawmakers, this is the tweet that is issued. And here we have the hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. So again, maybe we could say with Tucker Carlson that this is all okay. It's fine for them to grab Mike Pence. They're not really going to hang him. We're so sure of that. We're sure. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure the opposite. Here we are almost exactly the same time, a few minutes later. The mob's in the rotunda. The police, they are just standing around at this point. They're not trying to arrest anybody because what's going to happen here if these tiny number of police try to get in this melee with this group of people, already 174 of them went to the hospital. How many are going to go to the morgue? Okay, that's the problem the police have here. Here they are hunting for Nancy Pelosi down the corridor to the speaker's, it's called the speaker's lobby. This is where Ashley Babbitt is killed. There are 4 police there. This mob is pouring in, and that shot happened here. And again, you can be critical of the police. I'm not trying to tell you I'm not trying to tell you what to think. What I'm trying to show you is this is the situation that's being called peaceful. Altogether, 8 breaches into the Capitol, altogether. Then at 4:17, the crowd goes home. Why does the crowd go home? The crowd goes home because Donald Trump, the person who told them to go, tells them to go home. That's when the mob goes home. Now, who came on January 6th? We've seen the minute by minute, but who came and why did they come? So, as I told you, we studied every person that's been arrested, indicted for January 6th. That's over 1,300 as of just a couple months ago. And this shows you where they come from all across the country and lots of details. The key detail, though, is only 11% are from militia groups. 90%, 89% are not affiliated with Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, or those militia groups. This is what made the storm a storm, was that 89%. Also, nearly half were business owners and from white-collar occupations, doctors, lawyers, and attorneys. These are not rednecks in pickup trucks, folks. These are not the deplorables, folks. These are actually not just middle class, but pretty well off people with something to lose. Here are some pictures. This is a Boston area gynecologist. On the left, you see, this is her card in the hospital. She worked at a very famous women's hospital in Boston. And here she is on the right, duking it out with police. And she's wearing a mesh, knife-proof vest that she brought with her. You can't buy those on Capitol Hill. She came prepared to fight. Here is a healthcare executive. On the left, you see him at the White House Christmas party with Laura Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. And then on the right, you see him surrounded by the police saying he's not leaving and daring them, if you want me to go, shoot me, shoot me. Here's a lawyer from Long Island, and he is, there's his picture. He's also a member of a school board, former member of a school board. And then you see him grabbing batons from the police and literally fighting with the police. He's instigating, in other words. Here is a master's prepared nurse with her son. They brought zip ties to the Capitol. Again, what do you want with zip ties? They are to hunt lawmakers with and tie them up. And you can't buy these on the Capitol. So this is something you have to do. You have to be prepared. Here's another design engineer from Intel. Here he is on the left. He's a member of the Republican Party leadership in his home area. And there he is in hand-to-hand combat with Capitol Hill police. Here is an actor from Friday Night Live. It's a very popular television program. On the, you see him as an actor on the left, and on the right, he brought in his crutch, and he's using a crutch to beat the officers to get in. And here is somebody who's independently wealthy. He's an author. You can still buy his books on Amazon. And he lives off a trust fund. But what does he do here? He grabs shields and he is now using them to burst through with the police. And then here's somebody who he just missed making it before Trump's speech. He drove from Georgia trying to get to the Capitol here. The reason I want to show him is because people say there were no guns. And that's true for that period of time. But here he is with his assault rifle. And when he got there, he is looking for Nancy Pelosi to put bullets in her head. And he came with 1,000 rounds of ammunition. And also, you might be interested to know, because people say, were these people punished too harshly or not? He gets 2.5 years. 2.5 years. I think that's pretty impressive. He only gets 2.5 years. I'm not a lawyer, but it is really striking here. This is obviously incredibly dangerous. You would never want him catching Nancy Pelosi. Now, why do they say they came? Because we collected all of this information, all of their public statements. It's really, if you go to our website, our CPOST website, there are voluminous reports here. And the bottom line is, they say, many of them, they're coming because Trump asked me to come. They're doing what they believe their president wanted them to do. It's Trump that is making them come. And it's not just 4 of them, but I can just show you more and more and more, just like I can show you hundreds of pictures of the others here of their public statements about why they're doing it. And they just keep going back to Trump. It's Trump, Trump, Trump. It's Trump, Trump, Trump. And that's why Trump is who speaks to get them there in the first place. Trump is who speaks to send them off to attack the Capitol. And Trump is who speaks and calls them off. Now, was January 6th constitutional? This is something that has been touched on a bit, but I don't think this has gotten enough attention. And in some ways, maybe as much as you have already seen, this is maybe the most important issue, which is it the case that Donald Trump was simply following his role in the Constitution in an election or violating the Constitution? Well, I think you're going to see pretty clear evidence that the President of the United States, the sitting President of the United States, has absolute no role in the selection process of the next president. The Constitution and the amendments, they identify the actors who do, the state legislatures, the electors, the vice president as his role as president of the Senate, and the House of Representatives. So the actors who matter are all identified, but there is no role for the president. And it would be weird if there was, because after all, then that would mean the sitting president would decide who the successor would be, essentially. There would be a conflict of interest. Now, the text of the Constitution is in Article 2, Section 1. There's no mention of the president, the sitting president here. There's a lot of discussion of what should happen. But notice there's no mention of the sitting president. Then the 12th Amendment, again, this enumerates how the process is going to unfold. And there's no mention of the sitting president. This is just not happening. Now, this means then there are really big questions here for Donald Trump. This would also be true, by the way, for Tucker Carlson, and just in general about whether this was a danger to our democracy. You see, because Trump says that the Gen Sixers were peaceful. They had no guns, he said. They're not following his orders, he's saying. And he also goes on to say, well, liberals did the same in Portland and other cities. They too had protests, and the liberals didn't put them in jail. However, I would just point out that when protesters without guns attacked police in Portland, Trump called in the DHS agents to help defend the police. So why didn't Trump do that here? If Portland is really the analogy, then why didn't Trump call in his DHS agents? And keep in mind, the President of the United States has got infinite numbers of people on speed dial that he can call and move, and Washington is not that big here. Why isn't he calling in DHS agents or anybody else to defend the Capitol Hill police on January 6th? So, yes, we can kind of point other fingers and say, well, that's somebody else's problem. No, Trump, the president, is supposed to be a guardian of the Constitution in the sense making sure the process is fulfilled. And he's ultimately, that's his role, which means protecting Mike Pence, protecting the lawmakers, protecting the sanctity of Capitol Hill. Now, also, if they weren't following Trump's wishes, then why did they go home when he told them to? I mean, if this really is just this spontaneous crowd out of control here, then why are they, and they're not listening to Trump, as Trump says. But I want to really then start to close on what I think are some of the more bigger and then still more fundamental issues here. Because you see, if we say that if we conclude that it is okay for Trump to have done January 6th, that everything he did was perfect, then isn't it also okay for President Biden, if Harris loses, to do exactly the same as Donald Trump? To exactly call people to an ellipse? To exactly say you got to fight like hell, and as they start saying, storm the Capitol, that this is just okay here? Is this all really okay? Because what's happening here, folks, fundamentally, is as we go into this election is going to be a major statement on the legitimacy of January 6th, not just for Donald Trump, but as a precedent going forward as long as we have a country. You see, if Donald Trump is reelected, then the message that will send is that will mean that this is actually normal. We're okay with this. What happened on January 6th, as long as you stick to those bounds and just follow my presentation and stick to that behavior, you're good. We're good. And this is going to matter, that legitimacy, for the rest of the time as our country. This is going to play a big role for future politicians because future politicians on all sides will see that violence then isn't just a normal part that we'll kind of sweep under the rug. It'll be a way to gain power. And that then means it's really difficult to talk politicians out of it if this becomes the way to gain political power. And so this is why I wanted to talk about the danger of January 6th to our democracy, and fundamentally, the reason why there could be future January 6th is in our hands, folks. It's not just, will Donald Trump do it if he loses, or will Joe Biden or Kamala Harris do it if they lose? It's this election is going to determine the legitimacy of an action like January 6th for the future of our country as long as we have a country. And if Trump is reelected, this January 6th will be his legacy. This will be the biggest legacy Donald Trump will leave to our country and what we will be talking about 100 years from now. So thank you very much, Ben, for inviting me here, and thank you to the audience. And I look forward to the questions.
Dr. Pape, so much to go through and so many slides in such an impressive way to work through it. And I think the importance of the minute by minute, and I appreciate you doing that. A reminder for those watching in real time, if you're joining us via Zoom webinar, we're taking questions from you, the audience, using the Q&A function. If you happen to be watching on the JES's Facebook page, leave a question or a comment in the comment section below this post. Now, if you happen to be streaming on demand, still send us those questions as comments. We want to keep this conversation going because it's one that we're hearing more and more, and we're getting more attention. And Dr. Pape, I appreciate you going beyond the headlines to get us there. And one of the things that I was thinking about is the portrayal, or at least the framing, or the way that things are presented. And I think an important point that you focused on is who with the January 6th, because I forget your exact phrasing, but I'll draw from my own. I come from hillbilly country. I was once a redneck myself, but pickup truck driving stereotype for what we tend to think of when we think of Trump supporters. Yet, your research shows that half of the folks that showed up at January 6th are business owners or have white collar professions. Why is it then still that we have them when we think of Trump supporters, whether it's political cartoons or conversations that we have, we tend to think of that hillbilly pickup truck driving. It's a pickup truck versus a Prius in this conversation of conservative versus liberal. And yet that's not the case when we saw those who participated in January 6th. Why is that still a perception that we see playing out in mass media?
It's because this is a dimension of January 6th, the who, that has not really been developed by the media. The media loves to put a face on a problem, whatever it is, Zelensky and Ukraine, just a face on any issue. And what happened in the day of January 6th and then the days immediately after January 6th is the face that the media decided to put on January 6th was the QAnon shaman, kind of a nutty looking guy. Also, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers here. And then after this, the media identified this face, this becomes almost the central element in the media going forward. 60 Minutes does stories about, I mean, just over and over and over again. So that's issue number one. Issue number two, then, is that from the perspective of law enforcement, the FBI loves and was built to go after militia groups. So people may not know, why did the FBI get started in the 1920s? What was triggering that? Two things were triggering it. And they are two different types of criminal organizations. One is the rise of the second KKK, which is an organization, and in many, many states, not just in Georgia. The other is the rise of bootleggers, mafias related to bootlegging. Well, the FBI was built to take down militia groups. And they've done a great job of taking down the Oath Keepers in particular, basically been put out of business here. But that doesn't mean that's what made the storm a storm. They're just really good at doing that piece. So I think then what's happened is that there has been a key element, as much as we think we already know everything about January 6th, there really are key dimensions of this that have been really just left on the cutting room floor. And they, in my mind, are the critical elements because you didn't really need Donald Trump to call the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. They wanted to come already. They were built. Stuart Rhodes built the Oath Keepers to do something like an insurrection in the government long before Donald Trump came around. What really made the storm a storm was those 90%, those doctors, lawyers, accountants, business owners. That's what made the storm a storm. And these are folks who really are they're responding to Donald Trump.
And sticking with Trump for a second, I want to go. We're starting to get audience questions, and I want to go there because the first one says, "What of the fact that Trump offered National Guard troops in advance of January 6th, but was declined by Pelosi?" Because you also pointed to the fact that clearly, if I believe the number was 58 to 1 in terms of just from that shot, the data from Carnegie Mellon University of the number of officers to the number in the crowd, the mob. So what if this case that Trump offered
That's a
National
good
Guard?
legal, yeah. So I'm not a lawyer and I'm not trying to convict Trump in a court of law. And that's probably a good legal argument to try to get him out of some legal culpability. But let's be real, folks. This is the president of the United States. He doesn't just have one cell phone, he's got four cell phones. He can call in reinforcements and have them there within minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Okay, so let's give it 30 minutes the time it's going to take to travel here. And if Nancy Pelosi, let's follow this forward. Let's assume this is completely true. Nancy Pelosi was an idiot. She wouldn't assign the National Guard to be there. Well, does that mean we're just going to let those lawmakers be killed? No, we're going to respond. And that's what the president should be doing here. And if it was, and I don't even know why you would bother calling Nancy Pelosi, especially, let's just assume Trump's right, that she was idiotic enough not to do that. Well, then you ignore her in the loop and you just literally go and call the National Guard yourself. I mean, this is not that difficult of a problem for the president of the United States within, let's give him 20 or 30 minutes. So, So I just don't, I find this a good legal excuse, but I don't think this lets Trump off the hook for January 6th.
Well, and I think looking at the timing too that you gamed out minute by minute of they're inside the Capitol when the tweet about Mike Pence comes in, which, continues to be, I think, fuel on a fire that, has already, the tinderbox has already been sparked, and yet it continues. So I hear you when you say that there's ample opportunity for him to call into an additional support. Um, Irrespective of whether or not support in advance was called for and Nancy Pelosi would have had a role in it. Another question coming from the audience is, with regard to your constitutional comments, wasn't the legal argument per John Eastman's memo about Pence's role under the Electoral Count Act and not that Trump had a role as president? And if there was no validity to Eastman's legal argument or ambiguity in the law, why did the Democrat Congress quickly or quietly change the law after the fact? Long question. I can read it
Again,
again unless you've got the gist of it.
yeah, again, I'm not really trying to pretend I'm a lawyer and be Jack Smith here and all this. I think this is a giant mistake to go down these roads because we don't have a history of insurrections in the United States or a history of presidents fomenting a crowd and then setting them loose on a Capitol to know exactly where the legal rules are. You see, our case law, which of course comes from Britain, our law is built on case law. Well, hopefully we're not going to have another dozen of these events to really sort out the legal rules here. So I'm not trying to tell you there's not legalistic defenses for Trump here about keeping him out of jail. I'm not trying to tell you that. I'm not trying to put Trump in jail. The problem is going to last, as I'm telling you, if we reelect Donald Trump, what we're doing is we are legitimating this for future generations who will be here long after Trump and all the rest of us are dead. So this isn't about like, should we put Trump in prison here? That's way too narrow of a focus. The problem here, folks, is that we really are about to decide in less than 2 weeks whether general behavior is okay. And if all you need to be is get some lawyer like John Eastman to write some memo that you put in your computer and you just store it there or whatever, then we're good, which means we're going to have a lot of January 6s and we're going to have a lot of Democratic January 6s.
So what I think I already hear the answer, but I think it bears asking the question because this is an abnormality, an anomaly in our history. We've never seen this happen before. Yet here we are on the precipice of the election of 2024. Why haven't we seen it happen since 2021? Because we clearly saw both Democrats and Republicans speak out against it, and then we've seen the tone of the conversation change. Yet we haven't seen something, even if you were to scale it to a state level event or a state level election or a local level election. We haven't seen something. Maybe I'm speaking of ignorance and I've missed that news, but we've
No,
not
no, no.
seen something like
I would
this.
agree with you, Ben. And so rather than nitpick about this, let's just talk, about the core. I agree with you. We haven't seen it, but I think there's a very simple reason why we haven't had repeats here. It's because we haven't had this happened during an election, a transfer of presidential power, number one. So it's not just happening every day. And then number two, it hasn't been legitimated yet. Once we legitimate this as a country, and the key legitimacy here is not Tucker Carlson, and it's not Eastman, the lawyer. Okay. And it's not Jack Smith. The key legitimacy is the people of the United States deciding that it is okay to put this person who I just showed you the role he had here back in the Oval Office. If that is really okay, then that means future politicians, and maybe not Joe Biden, and maybe not Kamala Harris. Let's just assume they're too wimpy, okay? But there are going to be some others that are going to not be so wimpy. And that's going to be true going forward. We are not just legitimating January 6th for Donald Trump in a narrow sense. This is impacting the history of our country for our kids and our generations going forward. And once that happens, we can't take it back. So not really going to matter if we decide to take it all back. If the people have spoken, this will make that big of a difference in the whole history of our country.
So I'm not speaking for anybody in particular, but I'm thinking of in conversations that I've heard where it's not all that uncommon to say, I don't like the character of the candidate, but I like his policies. Could a voter be excused here to say, I don't agree with January 6th, and I don't think it would happen again, but I like the policies of a candidate, of the Donald Trump that you just presented on screen. Can they be absolved of casting a ballot and saying, well, I don't think it's going to happen again. I like his policies. I choose that over the Trump Vance policies over a Harris Walz policies that are being proposed. Do we let them off the hook for that? Policy versus character, history versus. Do you get where I'm headed with that? Can we let a
We
voter off the
we
hook for that?
could do that. We could do that for the Republican Party if it was Ron DeSantis, who was now we were about to voting on this election season, not Donald Trump as the Republican candidate, because Ron DeSantis had really no role at all here at all. There's not a single whiff of evidence that he was involved in this in any way whatsoever. So, but that's not the case, you see. So we're not really trading off my pocketbook, sort of getting back and the price of eggs here. This is not, this is true. The price of eggs is going up, but that's reversible, as is the border. We just found out that the Biden-Harris team, which said, oh, they could never stop the flood of the people across the border. Well, within about 2 hours, they stopped it. So we know that's fully reversible, if you see what I mean. What's not reversible is legitimating January 6th. Once we legitimate January 6th by literally putting the pivotal actor back in the Oval Office, who is the one responsible for the mob that made this possible, then we have just sent the signal for the rest of the time our country is a country, that this is a tolerable part of our politics. Yeah, maybe we only have a January 6th, what, every 10 years? No, it won't be so bad. This is a version of, no, they weren't really going to kill Mike Pence. Okay. No, we got in many ways fortunate. This January 6th wasn't more disastrous. They did cause the Congress to shut down. Okay. They came back, but they caused it to shut down. So what happens the next time? Well, we'll just do like 2 or 3 in a row. So we'll just shut down Congress for maybe 4 or 5 days. And then the next time, 2 weeks. This is the day, this is the world we're moving into. It's a slippery slope once we legitimate Donald Trump for doing January 6th.
So another question from the audience in thinking the key difference between 2020 and 2024 is that clearly in 2020, the incumbent's on the ballot and the incumbent is running, the incumbent loses. Here we have the incumbent president not seeking re-election. It's different. Does that make a difference in what we're looking at here? The fact that there are 3 players at play, not just 2 as we saw in 2020. Does that change this argument at all in terms of how, if it were the
It does
Democrats?
help. It does help a bit. I don't want to say it doesn't change it at all, but here's the thing that overlooks. That overlooks that for the police, and that overlooks for many people in our military, they still think Donald Trump was the legitimate president of the United States. So he doesn't have to sit in the Oval Office to be the legitimate president. You see, because if in fact, as he has said, and then many in the police and many in the military have said, that election was stolen from Donald Trump, then in their minds, and even according to their oath they took to the Constitution, their oath then is to the sitting president, and that sitting president doesn't have to be at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So the problem here is this is really about the core issues, not the atmospherics here. And we need to recognize that this is the level at which we're playing with our democracy. So this is maybe it's all going to be just fine, But that's like saying maybe if the crowd had gotten Mike Pence, it would be just fine. The risks here are just very great, and they're going to go on and on and on. And there may be people of a lot worse character coming, folks.
And going back to the audience for one more to say this person's not trying to let President Trump, then President Trump, off the hook, but I think it goes back to the question that came in about, but what about Nancy Pelosi and the National Guard? This person's saying not to let Trump off the hook, but would any of Trump's cabinet members or advisors have been responsible or held any sort of responsibility when it came to advising him more ardently, being clearer with him the day of to call in reinforcements to bring them in? This person says, I don't think anyone would doubt that Trump really didn't know what he could or couldn't be done, what he couldn't get done. But perhaps could somebody else have been more adamant about calling in support or directing
I
that?
think the person is probably right. I mean, I think that it's let's put it this way. Let's assume the fact about Nancy Pelosi that she just dismissed this whole concern here. I think that's actually quite shameful on her part. So I'm not coming at this just to defend Democrats either. I'm saying this is about the country here, and also think that the person is probably quite right, although we don't have the facts, and I'm going to say a word about that in just a moment, about others being culpable as well, not just Donald Trump. But here's what is going to happen if we legitimate Donald Trump here. Nobody is going to go in and dig out those other facts for that next level of responsibility. Just not going to happen because we will have spoken as a people that this is just okay. And the way that you would ever get sort of more like the outer circles here, the serious outer circles, would be if Trump is not rewarded for this. But if in fact Trump is rewarded, that he doesn't become like Mitt Romney, one and done, John McCain, one and done. That's our, usual history here. You get one shot at the presidency, and normally you're thrown out. But if what happened is it's because you did January 6th that you get the next you get the next bite at the brass ring, and you win that power. These issues here, which seem so important on our TV channels, by the way, I think are just not really going to matter very much because fundamentally, that's what this election is about. It's about when we say people have kind of had white noise about what does it mean democracy would be on the ballot or whatever. This is all vague. I'm trying to show you in detail what it means. It means that January 6th behavior by the president and the mob is okay.
And so to that white noise point, that democracy is on the ballot, that the future and fate of our country, our republic, our democratic republic as we know it, is at stake. We know that there are for certain voters one issue that is top of mind for them, and maybe they're even single issue voters. Did you research the data that you've analyzed? Does it reveal that for any block of voters, January 6th is their issue, or is at least top of the list for them when it comes to deciding a presidential candidate, irrespective of political party?
Yeah, the key place to go here, Ben, is in the exit polls in the midterms. So we might remember that the midterms were supposed to be a red wave. And that red wave did not happen, even though every pollster predicted it. I mean, Democrat, Republican. Well, then we got the exit data, so we now know why not. And the key people who mattered, and we actually have the data here, were the moderate Republicans. And what they were impressed by was the January 6th committee. So even though the January 6th committee was all being dismissed by all the media, oh, this isn't mattering, nobody's paying attention. Well, the truth is there was a sliver of America that was paying close attention, and that sliver was big enough to matter in the midterms. And by the way, it was being overlooked by everybody on both sides, okay, of the winning the horse race. So I am not here to try to tell you my career has not been kind of put Rahm Emanuel in office or Dick Lugar in Indiana in office. I'm not a campaign manager. I focus on political violence. That's what I study. And that's true with our surveys as well. And that's though what I can tell you is there was a role here, and that is the best evidence that that group, and I bet that is still true today, that there is this group, and in Western PA and Erie, this is going to matter. Erie and Western PA are the one of the several, if not the epicenter for this election, as you can tell by the candidates coming in more and more and more, almost on a daily basis. Um, but it's also the size of the popular vote. Putting aside, so there's the issue with the Electoral College, but then there's also the popular vote. It really matters where the people as a whole, the size of the popular vote, whether it's Trump barely almost wins it, or it's a big defeat for Trump. These decisions, this is what it means to legitimate January 6th.
So I'm glad that you brought up the January 6th committee and the importance of it. In Erie, Pennsylvania, we just had former U.S. Representative Liz Cheney to a crowd of 3,000 plus. I think those people cared about it and showed up. And I'm glad that you mentioned Erie because you and I are Western Pennsylvania guys. I grew up an hour south of Pittsburgh. You grew up in Erie. We've both passed through Pittsburgh at time to time. You've attended rallies, recently in Western Pennsylvania for both presidential candidates. Maybe it's too soon to ask you this question, but I've got to ask, what are you hearing on the ground when your team is out there surveying, talking to rally goers? What is standing out in your most recent surveying and data gathering?
The number, so as you said, been to rally. So went to the Butler rally that was just held must be about a week and a half ago now at this point. And that was the big place, of course, where Trump went back to where he was almost killed. And then also went to Kamala Harris's rally. And what I would say is in both cases, but I especially think this was true in the Trump case, it wasn't just the surveys we handed out then. That crowd, that back and forth between Trump and the crowd that I just showed that 20-second clip of, that is true to this day and probably bigger in the country than it's ever been. So I don't know exactly how many people were at that Butler rally. That's become itself a political football. I would myself estimate 50 or 60,000. Trump says 100,000. MSNBC says 20. So I don't know. I'm not counting it. But the big thing to know is that those folks are hanging on his every word. And when he tells them he's going to do a policy, they are egging him on and he is egging them on. This is a very, very, Trump is both a symptom and a cause at the same time. And what you are seeing, you see it in the rallies and you see it in this. So, up until now, Trump has occasionally said during his trials, oh, there'll be problems in the street, but he's never issued a post on Truth Social like he did on December 19th, 2020, much less followed it up with another 35 the next few days, really telling the folks he means it. Trump has an enormous amount of power with his movement.
What do you say to those that I'm cautious to use the word excuse, but those that would excuse or justify Trump's language to say that's just how he speaks, and it's different than other presidents. He's colloquial. He's clearly tapped into an every person kind of dialogue that isn't perhaps presidential at times, but those that say, when he says fight like hell, he doesn't mean literally. He just means, that we should care about things or it'll be wild in that, people just came to hear him speak. People that excuse the language because perhaps like his presidency, it doesn't fit in our tradition or our norm of what we've seen on a presidential candidates. What do you say to them that they excuse the language because it's just Trump
What I
being
say
Trump?
is that I think it's completely understandable unless you have seen what I just showed you with the January 6th rally at the Ellipse, literally the back and forth. Because if you don't really know that, if you just know, oh yeah, Trump gave a speech, the crowd did something, but you don't really see that symbiotic relationship with your own eyes, then it's very easy to excuse, or we all do this. We have a preferred candidate. There are now our team. We're rah, rah, rah for our team. You see what I mean? And yes, the quarterback has punched his girlfriend, but we're just going to ignore that because the fact is we need that quarterback in the next game, right? So this happens all the time. Let's be honest, folks. And yes, that's true. But what if you were actually watching this punch? For real. And that's what I'm trying to show you. I'm trying to show you this, not ask you to believe a professor. I'm asking you to believe your own eyes. And then also, if you're not going to the Trump rallies and you're not seeing the unbelievable commitment here by folks in the Trump rallies here, this is just really, really impressive. Maybe you would still excuse this. Okay, I can't tell you it would change minds, how many would change, but I think it's very easy to understand how people wouldn't change their mind. They would just blow it off. All they've done is hear this white noise of January 6th now for 4 years, where you've had, the policeman Fanon, an infinite numbers of 1 minute, things. And I just think that what's happening is we need to really kind of we need to respect people enough to show them the evidence.
Well, I think you in the audience, I'll ask you to forgive me if I misidentify the writer, but I think it's McKay Coppins from The Atlantic that has written several pieces encouraging people to go to Trump rallies to see them firsthand, to experience them, because perhaps what you're seeing on the news is not what's happening in reality, or that it's a more complex and layered story than we'd think. The time we have to do that is clearly a
And
closing
that's
window
the,
for people
yeah,
to do
Ben, I
that.
don't think so. I have that time as part of my research agenda to go to those rallies. And the truth is, I get my airfare. I stay at, the Holiday Inn, but I get that paid for, but from my research. Okay. So I am not in person who's actually, but it's different. That's one of the reasons it was so important to have our Zoom tonight to walk through the minute by minute on January 6th. That does not require, hundreds of dollars for an airplane ticket or a hotel room. This is, still relatively cheap. Zoom is relatively cheap. It's really just a matter of our time, an hour of our time. And that's really what I think is more reasonable. So I don't think when people says, and Kamala Harris has said, just go to his rallies. Well, again, this is just not really going to happen. The people and that's why I think we've lived in a world where you have people summarizing what's happening at the rallies. And I did that too. I told you what Butler was like, but I didn't come here to talk about Butler for real. I came here to talk about this minute by minute, because that's not just Professor Pape's interpretation. This is what really happened that day.
And so as we're almost out of time with that hour that you've been gracious to give us, and we're appreciative to have, I'll ask you a two-part question. Knowing that here we are on Thursday, October 24th, many people can vote early at this point. Voting ends on November 5th, actual election day. And then, of course, we have no idea whether we'll know that night or the next day or the coming days as ballots are being processed and tallied. But here as we march toward the inevitable election, the two-part question is, one, what should we be looking for? What should we be on guard for or attentive to or trying to make sure we're not missing in these few remaining days before the polls are closed? And the second part is, if we're in conversation with somebody and we've experienced this program, we've gone through your minute by minute, and they haven't, and we talk to them and they say, I hear you, but, and they're still trying to make a case. What is the best way to sum it up? So what should we be on the lookout for? And the best way to have, or at least begin a conversation with somebody that says, I hear you, but, and they're dismissing what I think is a clear case that does cut through the noise of our democracy is on the line and explains why in a minute by minute fashion. What do we tell them?
So two things. In the very near term, after on November 5th and after November 5th, the danger of political violence, we don't have to think about this as, again, January 6th, because January 6th already happened. The danger will again revolve around counting of the vote. And in Pennsylvania might be determined by just 1 or 2 percentage points. So the real dangers in Pennsylvania are to election officials, to election workers, and that get higher after November 5th. So ballot tabulation centers are fixed areas. And we just saw that with the Trump would-be assassins, they prepared. They prepared. And so the incentives here for attackers, lone wolves, others, will go up, whoever the loser is. And this is something that now is being legitimated because they're seeing that political violence might be their only way to stop these, what they will believe is an awful outcome. Now you can say that'll be just fine, we can live with this political violence, but so far notice how lucky we have been, how lucky we've been that Trump is still alive, Nancy Pelosi is still alive, Barack Obama was not physically attacked. So we can just keep playing that game of Russian roulette until somebody does get attacked, and then we'll point fingers again, or we can start to really focus on what are these underlying factors, and that's what I'm showing you here. This isn't just an FBI problem or a Secret Service problem. This is an all of America problem. Now, the other thing to say is, okay, so people go here and they leave. I think the most important thing here is if this has moved you, is not to sort of pretend you could verbally convince somebody else or so forth. I think it would just be to tell them that this is, if this is true, that it was surprising. You were really, really surprised that after all these 4 years, there was actually anything more to say. And I think then that could go back to Ben, you've got everything on the website you do, the faith and so forth. Somebody could go back. And I think that would be extremely reasonable. But I think that's the way we really talk to each other. We don't try to really kind of needle other people, our friends, our husbands, our wives, our daughters, our sons, our uncles, our coworkers. We just let them know, look, I really wasn't expecting anything, and I just was surprised. And then that might be enough to get people to look for themselves.
Dr. Robert Pape, the founder and the director of the University of Chicago's project on security and threats, political scientist, published author many times over, and of course, proud Erie native. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing your insights, your knowledge, your research, your data, your expertise, and engaging and informing conversation here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you, thank you, thank you to all you folks for tuning in, your great questions, for being a part of this dialogue, for hanging with us. And as a reminder, as Dr. Pape just said, you can head to our website, jeserie.org, find all of our content, including helpful links to Dr. Pape's work and the things that he is doing. You will find all of that there on our website, jeserie.org, and be sure to connect with us on your social channel of choice. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Spigen. Thank you for listening and learning with us.